looks like we've got some new attendants who haven't tuned in before, so welcome. We're joined today by Conny Cooper. Now, I've had the pleasure of taking one of Conny's courses before on classical needling, and for me that was a bit of a game changer, really. And we recently, since then, Conny's actually become the CEO of the RCHM, so we're really glad to be having this collaborative connection between BXC and RCHM now. So before we get started, I'm just going to remind people that this today will be recorded. So if you are asking any questions, if you're using the raise your hand function, then do bear in mind that you will be in the recording. You can always turn off your video, or you can change your name to anonymous if you want to remain anonymous. So Fab, we'll hold all our questions up until the end, unless Conny takes any as she goes. So do use the chat box if you like, but what works a lot better is if you do the raise your hand function, and we'll unmute each person as they go. If you want to ask your question, and then I'm sure Conny do her best to get through all of them today. So without further ado, Conny Cooper, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Okay, thank you very much, Alan. And thank you very much for inviting me to do this webinar today. So I'm Conny Cooper, I'm from the RCHM, and I'd like to start by saying that I think the last few months have really been quite challenging for all of us, for our whole profession, for the whole country, as we have tried to deal with a pandemic situation, we have tried to deal with the lockdown situation. And with all this going on, I think it's been really, really positive that the BXC and the RCHM have been able to work together, for example, by creating the joint back to work guidelines and coordinating our return out of lockdown. It's been really, really positive, and I would really like to keep that going for future. So as part of this collaboration, I'm very excited to be here today and to be holding this talk. So what we are talking about today are the 8 functions of Qi, exploring the missing link. I just realized I wrote the mission link. Sorry, that should be the missing link between Dao Yin and needle scale. There we go, that's some autocorrect. So exploring the missing link between Dao Yin and needle scale. And to really get us started, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about myself. My background is that for many years, I was a Tai Chi and Qigong teacher. I used to teach Tai Chi and Qigong with the Meituan Academy. And as part of that, I used to practice a lot. I used to spend lots of time every day. If I could, no matter what else was happening in my day, I would go to the woods behind my house, spend an hour there doing Tai Chi, doing Qigong. And it was a wonderful practice. It's something that really gave me a lot. And I found myself being, feeling much calmer, feeling grounded, feeling strong in myself. I also found myself having lots of really interesting Qi sensations, having warmth, having tingling happening in my hands. So it was a really, really great practice that brought me a lot of benefit. What I was also doing at the time is that I was a Chinese medicine practitioner. So I was practicing acupuncture, and I was going into my treatment room and giving treatments. And I was happy with the treatments I was giving. I think I gave very good treatments. But for me, I always had a little bit of a question in the back of my mind. And the question was, well, what really is the link between what I'm doing every day in the woods and what I'm doing every day in my practice room? Now, undoubtedly, you could say that if I'm feeling grounded, if I'm feeling calm, if I take that into the treatment room with me, then absolutely it will have an impact. It will make the treatment room feel safer, it will allow the patient to relax, it will improve the treatment. So undoubtedly, that was a link. And also the fact that I felt all these Qi sensations in my hands and that I was able to bring that into the treatment room with me, that would improve the quality of the touch with the patient, and it would mean I would pick certain things up. Maybe what the needling I am doing will become a little bit stronger from it. So undoubtedly there's a link there too. However, for me, there was something that was missing, which is in terms of actual needle technique, what we're actually doing. What I learned was you put the needle in, and then you're going to twiddle the needle, and you twiddle it clockwise or counterclockwise. And then you use your intention, whatever that means. And that was about the extent of the needling instructions that we had. And that is something that was on my mind a lot, because I was thinking, well, do I really need to be practicing so much Tai Chi and Qigong just to twiddle a needle? Is that really having an impact? What really is the link there? What is actually going on? And so that's something that was in my mind for a long time. It's a question that I sat with for quite a while, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on, that little space between what I was doing in my Tai Chi Qigong practice and what I was doing in my acupuncture practice. And then I discovered the 8 functions of Qi. What are the 8 functions of Qi? They come from the Yin-style Bagua medical system, and they're a whole system of diagnosis and treatment. Now, I was introduced to these 8 functions of Qi by Andrew Nugent-Head from the Association for Traditional Studies when he taught a series of seminars in London around 2012. Andrew himself learned them when he spent 28 years in China. He learned them there from Dr. Xie Peiqi. Dr. Xie was a traditional doctor, an old school doctor who'd learned medicine himself before the communists came and take over the system. And from Dr. Xie, we can even go back a number of generations as well. We can trace the lineage back. So what's really interesting for me here is that we're talking about a medical system, a system of knowledge that's been transmitted through that student-teacher relationship, teacher-student relationship. So it's a certain pathway of knowledge. It has not come through the standard hospital TCM system, which is the one used normally in China today. It's not come through the 5-element system, which we're familiar with in the UK nowadays as well. It's a completely separate system as well. So as we're going through this talk today, what I would invite you to do is to put to the side in your mind, put to the side, any system you have so far, whether it's TCM, 5 elements, or Japanese acupuncture, whatever other system you have, put that to one side and create a whole new space for this here, because this is a whole system in itself. So what are we actually talking about? What are these 8 functions of Qi? So the idea behind the 8 functions of Qi is that every aspect of the body, every physiological aspect, every aspect of health can be brought back to one or more of these functions of Qi. We have opening and closing, raising and lowering, gathering and dispersing, exiting and entering. So let's go through them. Let's look at opening and closing. So for example, our eyes open and close, our mouth opens and closes. Internally, the stomach opens and closes to receive food and push food through. The whole digestive system opens and closes and pushes food through. We have the lower orifices that open and that close. We have the pores on our skin which open and close. So opening and closing is something that happens throughout our body. And what's important here is that we need to have the correct proportion of opening and closing. So for example, our eyes are open in the day and are closed at night. So we want more opening than closing because we spend more time awake than sleeping. Is that proportion that's important. The lower orifices, we need them to be closed all the time, unless we're using them, unless we're having a bowel movement, unless we're passing urine. That's the only time we want them to be open. Otherwise, they need to be closed. So it really is about this balance, about finding the correct proportion between opening and closing in all these aspects. Raising and lowering. So again, these are 2 very, very important functions in the body. We want some raising to happen and we want some lowering to happen. So we want raising to happen because we want Qi and blood to come up. We want Qi and blood to come up and nourish the head. We want our brain to be nourished, our eyes, our ears, everything at the top of their body needs to be nourished. And equally, we want raising to happen so that things don't pool in the feet, don't pool in the lower body. So for example, if we don't have enough raising, we might have fluids gathering down there. We might have edema. We now might have organ prolapse if things aren't being raised, aren't being held up. So we want that raising function to happen. Equally, we want lowering as well, because if things are too high up, that's not good either. So inside the body, we want lowering, we want the food to go down, the stomach Qi to descend, we want everything to go down to the digestion, we want the air to go down into the lungs, we want Qi and blood to go down into the feet, so we have nourished feet, warm feet, so we feel grounded. So again, we need to have that balance between how much raising we want and how much lowering we want. Gathering and dispersing. Again, we need the right balance. Somebody whose Qi is is too dispersed, is not gathered enough, will be very, very unsettled, very, very ungrounded. There's some people, you meet them, and you just want to gather with them. You want to give them a hug and bring everything in to make them feel calmer, to make them feel better in themselves. We want to gather for things to build, for things to nourish. Often people are deficient, don't have enough, because whatever they have, it gets too dispersed too quickly. So then we want to gather things in. We want to gather the spirit in to allow things to build and be nourished. But equally, if there's too much gathering, we end up with accumulations, we end up with masses. They can be in the muscles, so that's, you know, your Asher treatment, we have muscle knots, we need to go in there and really disperse them very strongly. It can be in the body, it can be in the digestion, it can be masses in the gynae system, anything where things are just too clumped, and then we need to disperse, we need to move. And we have exiting and entering. So we need chi and blood to go into a part of the body, and we need it to go back out again. If we look at a limb, if we look at an arm or a foot, if we have too much entering into it and not enough exiting, we end up with swelling, redness, inflammation. There's just too much in there, and we need to work on exiting things out. Whereas if we don't have enough in a limb, then the limb is pale, weak, skinny, atrophied, and then we really need to work on bringing chi and blood into the area. So these are the 8 functions of chi. And the beauty about, you know, this kind of Chinese thinking, what I really love about it so much is the idea that it's so fundamental. If you think about it, everything makes sense. You think, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, everything is really common sense. And the beauty of it then is just taking these really simple fundamental principles and applying them. Looking at a patient in front of you and seeing exactly how much of each is happening, where is there too much of, where is there not enough of? Because if we look at all these functioning and we think, okay, physiologically, this is what should be happening, then if somebody has a disease, if somebody is unwell, then we say, okay, so what is not happening? Or what is out of balance? What do we need to bring back into balance? So we can use the 8 functions of chi to understand a state of health and also of disease. Let's look at a couple of examples. For example, we have a patient who has headaches, red eyes, and is prone to anger. So in TCM, we would say maybe that's a person who has liver fire or liver yang ascending. That's the kind of diagnosis we would say in TCM. In 5 elements, we would say, well, possibly it's a wood CF, and we would go down that route. Whereas if we're saying the 8 functions of chi, we're thinking, well, what's happening with this person? There's just too much raising going on. In a nutshell, that's what it is. The chi is going up too much. That's the headaches, the red eyes, the anger, everything is lifting up. Now, in reality, it's rarely that simple. It's very, very rare that we just have, you know, this one person, you know, this one function of chi that's not working. So there's probably other things going on. We probably also have, if they're very prone to headaches, chi is lifting up, and then maybe they have, you know, gatherings there. They have a lot of muscle tension. So that's too much gathering, which means that whatever chi goes up too much, and then also it's unable to come back down. There's an exit problem because of too much gathering in there. So in terms of treatment, if we wanted to treat this person, we could, for example, think, okay, let's start by dispersing. We're going to disperse whatever accumulations they have in the neck here. And then we're going to, once this is open, we're going to really descend the chi so it exits the head and comes down to the lower body. And then what we could also do, for example, is do some work on the lower jiao to really gather chi in the lower jiao and allow it to build in the lower jiao so that it doesn't flare up again. So we have a whole strategy of working with a patient where it's really one thing that we do, but we have to understand, look at all the different functions, see how they come together, and see exactly what we're going to do with this patient in front of us. Let's have another example. A patient who is a worrier, who overeats, who feels bloated, gets pain in the digestion, and has loose stools. So in TCM terms, we may say that's a person with spleen, qi, shu, and damp. In 5 elements term, we may say that's a person with an earth CF, and we work with that. In terms of the 8 functions of chi, we would say, well, possibly this is a person who has too much gathering in the digestion, in the abdomen. There's too much going on there. In terms of treatments, we would think, okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to start by doing techniques that will disperse the chi, move things around in the abdomen. And then we want to try to exit with all the excess that's in there. We need to exit. So we're going to pull it down. We're going to pull it down into the feet, allow it to disperse that way. And then we also want to lift it up, bring it upwards, so that we move things in the middle, and then we have that up-down mechanism where we pull things up and pull things down to get the chi mechanism going again, so that everything starts to function better. So again, it's about strategy. It's about doing one thing and then strategizing to really work with all those things together. So these are the treatment principles. So we've got, what's interesting here also, do notice that I'm using the same words. I'm using exactly the same vocabulary to describe health, to describe a state of disease, and to describe the treatment principles. We all talk about lifting and lowering, for example. It can be what happens in health. It can be the disease. It can be a treatment principle. And then we're also going to come to the actual treatment now. And the actual treatment, this is now where our needle techniques and our bodywork techniques really come into play. And we have needle techniques and bodywork techniques to gather, to lift, to disperse. This is exactly the same vocabulary we use for those needle techniques as well. Now, do notice when I'm talking about treatment here, I'm talking about techniques, needle and bodywork techniques. I'm not talking about the choice of points, because it's not about the point. It's about really what we are doing to manipulate the chi, to make something happen for that person. If I'm doing a technique to raise or to lower the chi, for example, as long as I'm doing the technique and I've got a really good solid technique to do this, I can do it theoretically from anywhere in the body. It's not about doing it at a particular point and letting the point do the work. It's about me really using my skill and making something happen. Now, there are some areas of the body where it's much easier to do those techniques. So, of course, we tend to do them at a certain point, because there are certain points where it's much easier to do a raising or descending technique than at others. So we will end up going towards the same areas all the time, but it's not the point itself that does the work, it's our technique. Now, I'm going to go on a little aside here as well, for those of you who are herbalists. And even for those of you who are not, I hope you will find this interesting, you know, as a way of thinking about herbs, just for a few minutes. Because what's really, really nice about this 8 functions of Qi system is that it really unifies everything, and it also brings herbs into it. And we're using exactly the same vocabulary, the same thought process to work with herbs. This is how we use the flavor and nature aspect of the herbs. So for example, on the left here on the slide, I've listed the flavors of the herbs from the Neijing and what they can do from the Neijing. So acrid can disperse. This is if you have a herb that's very spicy, that's very acrid, and you know, imagine biting into a hot pepper and you just start to move and you start, you may get a sweat and you get a little bit hot and agitated. That's because that's what that flavor does. Acrid, spicy can disperse. Sour can gather. That's biting into a lemon. If you imagine biting into a lemon, it really, everything gathers and puckers in. So it's that gathering movement that sour does. Bitter can dry or can drain. So if I'm biting into something bitter, eating something bitter, it's a very descending flavor. You tend to go, oof, you tend to descend everything, and it dries and drains and exits things out of the body. And then we have sweet. Sweet can build, so it slows things down, allows things to gather, allows things to build. And salty softens. And on the right-hand side, you have the nature of the herbs. So we have warm herbs that will speed things up, cool herbs that will slow things down. We have light herbs that lift, it's a raising functions, and heavy herbs that descend, that's lowering function. So to come back to the 2 patients we just discussed, if I have a patient, with too much lifting, with accumulations here, so things are gathering in the head and not enough descending, I may choose to give them some acrid herbs, light acrid herbs that will really lift up and really move the accumulations around. And then I will add some heavy herbs to really descend the chi. And then I will add some sweet heavy herbs, which will build the chi in the lower abdomen. So it's exactly the same strategy, exactly the same way of thinking. Or my second patient, with all the gathering in the abdomen and the bloating and the pain in the abdomen, I could start by giving them aromatic acrid herbs to really start to move all this damp around in the digestion. And then I can give them bitter herbs, which will pull down and dry and drain. And at the same time, I can also give very light acrid herbs that will really lift up and get the digestion going in that way. So again, we have the same idea that we're moving in the middle, and then we're going to lift up, and then we're going to pull down. So exactly the same principles again. Okay. So now we've covered that. We've looked at the 8 functions of qi, and we looked at how we assess the body in reality, in health, how we assess it in disease, our treatment principles, what we're actually going to do with the patient. Now, we're actually back in my very first question, which is, what is the link between Dao Yin and needle technique? And I realized that was the very first question. I haven't actually addressed it yet. The word Dao Yin, I use the word Dao Yin and Qigong interchangeably in this talk because they mean pretty much the same thing. Qigong is the term that was created by the communists in the 1950s to refer to those practices. So it's a more modern word, whereas the word Dao Yin is a more traditional word to describe the same things. But it is pretty interchangeable. And because the practices I'm going to talk about come through this lineage that have come through the traditional teacher-student relationship, I will use the word Dao Yin because that's the one that's most relevant here. Within that lineage, the Yin style Bagua system, we also have a set of Dao Yin practices. And these Dao Yin practices directly relate to the 8 functions of qi. And we call them the 8 storing qi and developing sensitivity exercises. So we have 8 practices. 1 is to store qi, and the other 7 are to develop sensitivity. Now, looking at those words, developing sensitivity, we're developing sensitivity to those functions of qi. That's what the practices are for. So we develop the sensitivity in our own body so we can start to really feel what it means if something's opening, if something's closing, what happens if we lift, what happens if we descend, if we gather, if we disperse, all these things. We want to actually feel them in our body. If we can feel them in our body, we're much more likely to recognize them in somebody else. We're much more likely to be able to look at another patient and think, I think that's what they're missing, or I think that's what they've got too much of. And then we can also start to really change them, affect them. When we manipulate the qi, if we know what it feels like, we know what we're looking for, we have a much better chance of really making it happen in the other person. Now, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the idea of Qigong and Dao Yin, and the idea that it's not about just doing those things once and then you've ticked it off and you've got it. The idea is that you do your practice and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And every time you do it, you develop a little bit more. You understand a little bit more. You become a little bit more sensitive. You understand a little bit more about your body, about how it works. You understand a little bit more about what you see in somebody else. So the idea is really that we're developing over a certain length of time. What I'd like us to do today is I'm going to do 4 of those movements. I invite you to join me if you want to, or you're welcome to just watch. If you do have a little bit of space where you can just play with them, even if you're sitting down, you don't have to stand up, just do them sitting down, any which way you can, would be interesting, because then you can start to really, feel what we're talking about, and you'll have a much better understanding. But if today's not the day for you, then that's absolutely fine. And we're going to do 4 of them. And then we'll come back afterwards to actual needling technique and see how we can really use those for the needling. Okay, so let me stop screen sharing. Okay. I'm going to stand up. So can everybody still hear me and see me? Actually, I was thinking before we start, Alan, do we have any questions? Now might be a good time to take 5 minutes and to answer any questions that we can have. Let me get my chair again.
So far, we don't have any. Apologies. So far, we don't have any in the chat box, but
Okay.
if anybody does want to ask a question, either raise your hand or type in now. Oh yes, and Jennifer does also point out that while we watch Conny do the exercises, if you put on speaker view, you'll be able to see Conny nice and big rather than a tiny little thumbnail.
Okay, well, if we have no questions. Let's get started.
Fab.
All right, so let me bring this back. All right, can everybody see me? More or less. More or less. Okay. All right, so if you're standing or if you're sitting, I invite you to place your hands on your lower abdomen. And we're going to start feet shoulder width apart if you're standing. And we take a moment to just relax, breathe deeply, find some empty space inside us. Where we just feel our body, feel our feet. Take a couple of nice breaths. Okay. The first practice we're going to do is opening practice. To do this, we're going to bring our arms up, nice and softly to the side, palms down, and then we settle. And then from here, we're going to turn. So leading with thumbs, we're going to turn our arms out. So hands out, arms out into the chest, really stretching out into this position. And then we come back to the front. And again, same thing. So we turn from the thumbs, pulling backwards. And back. And once more. And from here, once we've done it a few times, we're going to lift our arms up, palms facing in. Drop your shoulders, but we're really stretching upwards, so stretching into the tips of the fingers. Feel the stretch coming all the way down your rib cage here as well. That's why we want to keep the elbows a little bit soft, keep the shoulders down, so we have that nice stretch. And then we turn the palms forwards and we bring the hands down as if we're going against a wall. And hands back on the abdomen, underneath the belly button. We take another deep breath. And let's repeat. So we bring the arms out. We settle. We're going to stretch. Now this time, as you're stretching backwards, as you're coiling, also really stretch outwards to the sides. So it's a spiral that's going out. We're going backwards, we're going to the front as well. Sorry, going to the sides as well. And back. And again, we're stretching nice and gently, but as far as you can. And back. And last time. And we come back. Bring the arms up, palms facing in. We take a moment to stretch here, stretch into all the fingers. So I'm going to come down so you can really see that I'm stretching the arms up here, but dropping the shoulders, keeping the elbows a little bit bent so there's no tension. And then we turn the palms forwards and bring them down nice and softly. Now let's do it once more. And this time as we're doing it, I'd like us to really focus on the feeling coming, not just from the hands, but tracing that feeling all the way down the arm, into the chest, and if we can, all the way down into the abdomen. So that stretch, that opening is happening throughout the body. So we're lifting up, we're settling. And let's really feel that stretch. So you're starting by pulling the thumb back, stretching all the fingertips, and then feel that stretch coming into your forearms, the arms, into the chest. And back. And let's see if we can follow it even further down. Chest into the abdomen. Can you open all the way down at the front here? And once more, last time. Here's a challenge for those of you who want. See if you can feel the stretch coming all the way down the front of the body to your feet. And back. Reaching up, palms facing in. Palms forwards and down. And we're going to take a couple of breaths here in our starting position. And I invite you to really think about your body and see how you feel. Which parts did you just stretch? What do they feel like? What's the overall feeling that you've got at the moment? For me, whenever I do the opening movement, it's a real feeling of, yes, I'm open to the world. I'm much more aware of what's happening around me. I'm aware of the room a lot more. Everything's really opening up and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm here. I'm in the world around me. So you may feel that or you may not. You know, we're all different, so you may feel something else and that's fine. Okay, let's do our closing practice. So for closing, we're going to start with the arms in front of us, as if you're holding a ball, and we're gently going to bring the hands together and then bring them out again. Together. Breathe in as they come out, breathe out as they come in. For this practice, we're putting a stronger emphasis on coming in than coming out. So we're pressing the hands in together. And then we're just relaxing to open them up again. We're pressing in and relaxing. Pressing in and relaxing. Next time the hands come together, we'll bring them all the way together. So we're touching the fingertips. A very light touch, and we're just aware of that space between our hands, that little ball of space of air. Elbows close in, so everything feels closed, but a very gentle touch. And then from here, we're going to bring all the fingertips together. And this time, we're really going to press them in. So press the fingers together, press them against each other, but keep it soft. You don't want the fingertips to go white because that's a sign that the chi and blood is stopping, is not circulating anymore. So over time, the more you practice this, the stronger you can press while keeping the chi and blood flowing. And then the next step is we bring the palms together right in front of us. And we're pressing the hands together here. The key is to increase the press, increase the movement, make it strong and stronger, but as slowly as possible. Staying nice and soft, nice and relaxed. You're not pressing from the hands. Imagine you're pressing from the elbows. So your forearms and hands are completely relaxed because your elbows are being pushed together. And relax. Let's do it again. So we start again with the arms out, holding the ball. We're going to gently press in, push them in, and then relax to let the hands come back out. And we push inwards and relax. And push in and relax. Push in and relax. And let's bring our fingertips together. Nice light touch. Elbows against us. Sink the chest. You're not sticking the chest out, just everything sinking down, sinking in a little. And bringing the fingertips together. And again, a nice, good, solid push on this one. We're pressing the fingers together, pressing them against each other, and then right and left against each other as well. And prayer position. Pressing the hands together, starting gently and then making the push stronger and stronger. But not coming from the hands, so we're completely relaxed. Feel your elbows pushing together. And then the next step is see if you can make it come from the shoulder blades. So your whole arms are relaxed. It's actually the chest here, the sinking in the chest that is pushing the hands together. And relax, hands back on the abdomen. And again, take a moment to just notice how you feel. It's a very, very different feeling for me doing the opening and then doing the closing practices. After the closing, I'm always quite happy to just stay here for a while and enjoy just being here. Maybe closing my eyes and just feeling what's happening inside my body and just hanging out here because it's just nice to focus on everything that's happening inside. Okay, let's do our next one. Let's feel our next one. We're going to work with the raising practice. So we're starting in the same position again. And this time we're going to start by bringing the hands down a little bit in front of us and then scooping up, bringing them up right in front of the body. And then to the back of the neck. So we're gently brushing past the base of the skull. And then lifting up and gently stretching up. Gently stretching up. Ideally, you want your hands to be right above do 20 by way if you can. Keeping the elbows a little bit bent. Shoulders down. But stretching, really stretching up into it. Again, stretch the side of the rib cage. Get everything lifted up. And relax. Hands back on the abdomen. Let's repeat. We start by bringing the hands up in front of us, the fingertips nearly touching, not quite, but nearly touching. Lift, lift, lift. Base of the skull, and then reaching up just above our head, above Bahui. And feeling that nice stretch, the nice lift happening in the body. And relax, arms back down. We're going to do it once more. And this time, as you're lifting, do focus a little bit on your feet, on Yong Tren. Even when we're lifting up and we're bringing everything up, we always want to have a little bit of the opposite movement in there as well. So we're going to lift up, but just focus a little bit, be aware of your feet on the ground. So we'll bring the hands up in front of us. Lifting, 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 just feeling our feet a little bit. Behind the head. And reaching up. Stretching up and just a little bit of sinking, a little bit of grounding happening. And if you get it right, that actually really accentuates the lifting. If we drop a little bit with the legs, drop, just bend the knees ever so slightly, bring everything down, it really opens up this area, it really gives you space to really stretch upwards into it. Okay. And hands come back down. We take some deep breaths and again, just focus on how you're feeling. What a difference again to the closing movement. I always feel a little bit taller when I do this one, it's nice. My posture feels lighter, straighter. I feel very elegant, it's lovely. And again, that feeling of being aware of what's happening around me, but not in an open way, this way, really going upwards, being aware of the sky, everything happening above me. Okay, let's do the lowering practice. So for this one, we're going to bring our arms up sideways to the top, leading with the wrists. Leading with the wrists. And then we bring the hands down in front of us and we press down. Again, fingertips, the middle of the middle finger nearly touching, pressing down. Imagine a cafetiere, you're making coffee and you've got a cafetiere and you're really pushing down and you're pushing all the turbid, the heaviness down in your body. Down, 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 down. When you've gone as low as you can, keep pushing down and you end up in this position here where your hand is parallel to your leg, but pointing down, fingertips are still pointing down into the ground. And you can imagine that the movement, this pushing down you were doing in your body, it follows your hands. And then when your arms have gone as far as they can go, you're pointing your fingers down and the movement keeps going, keeps happening past your knees, your calves, into the feet, into the ground as deep as you want. Hands back on the abdomen, we take a couple of deep breaths. And we repeat. So bringing the arms up sideways, leading with the wrists, so our shoulders stay low. And then pressing down. Picture that movement happening inside your body, the pressing down happening inside the body, or the turbid being pushed down. And then your fingers are pointing down by your sides, the movement carries on. So you're feeling it inside your legs, all the way to the ground and into the ground. Hands back on the abdomen. we're going to do this one once more. And this time, as you're pushing down, think about a little bit of lift happening as well. So the top of your head lifting up just a little bit. Again, it's this idea of balance. When we go up, we want to have a little bit of down. When we go down, we want to have a little bit of up. So bringing the arms out to the sides, leading with the wrists, coming all the way up. Pressing down. As you're pressing down, just lifting the head up a tiny bit, being aware of by way. Pulling up. And again, that creates space. You'll find that creates space that allows the descending movement to happen much more easily. And hands back on the abdomen. And see how you feel this time. I mean, I'm so aware of my feet right now. My feet, it feels like they have roots going deep down into the ground. I feel a little bit short again, quite squat and solid, really grounded. Okay, and relax. So let me grab my chair again, and everybody's welcome to relax. What we have done right now, we've done 4 of the 8 practices. And I've chosen 4 which are quite easy to get into. And hopefully you all had, you enjoy the practices, and you also all had a little bit of feeling, a little bit of sensitivity. What do I mean by opening? What do I mean by closing, lifting, lowering? That you really felt something happening inside you as you were doing it. So let's share, I'm going to share my screen again. There we are. Now that we've done these exercises, let's really try to put everything together. So we have the theory of the 8 functions of qi and what they're doing, how we look at disease using those 8 functions of qi, our treatment principles, what we want to do. We've also got the Dao Yin that allows us to develop sensitivity and skill to understand these functions. Let's actually bring it together and imagine we have a patient in front of us who's got anxiety. How are we actually going to treat them using that system? Now, as we mentioned, the reality is that if somebody comes in, very often they'll have a mixture of all these functions. It's not just one thing that happens, but just for today, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to imagine 4 people who need 4 very different things. So they all come in with anxiety. But the first one is a person whose qi really needs lifting. So that's a person, you just look at them and they're heavy and their posture is bad. And you can tell that they're so anxious inside, and what they just need a good lift. They need to be really lifted up, and then all of a sudden everything will be much clearer. You really want to bring the qi and blood to the head so that they can think more clearly. And then we have the opposite. We have a patient whose qi is too high up and needs lowering. So that's a patient who's very agitated and can't sit down, and their feet keep moving. And that's the opposite. You want to grab them and just, sit them on the chair, tell them, stop moving your feet, take a deep breath, breathe into your feet, calm down, you'll be fine. So that's that patient that we really want to pull downwards. Our patient number 3 is a patient who needs exiting because they just have too much inside them. So there's just too much going on, and that's a patient who will never sleep. And if they do sleep, they have all these dreams happening, and you get them to lie down on the couch and they just can't relax on the couch. Their eyes are wide open and they keep talking to you, and you tell them, just relax, let's not talk for a minute, let's relax into it. And they just cannot do it. They will carry on talking because there's just too much harassing them in there. So we really need to exit things out, pull things out of them. And the last one is a patient whose qi needs gathering. So that's the one that's really agitated and quite deficient They may be quite slim and pale and have a weak voice, and we really want to gather them and give them a big hug and hold them there so that she can build, she can have that chance to actually develop and hold the spirit. So these are the 4 people that we will be talking about today. And finally, we come to our needle techniques, bodywork techniques. So I know this is where we started, but we had to come with, I had to give you all this system that's underlying it to actually reach this point here where we can now talk about the needle techniques and they will make sense to you. Now, this is a point where normally we'd be in a room and I would be demonstrating those needle techniques on somebody, and then you will be practicing on each other and you get feedback and you have a chance to experience them. Today we're on Zoom, so that's not possible. I will do my very best to explain those needle techniques using a pen in my hand, yeah? And hopefully you will still understand and you will understand the idea of it. And you will have things to practice from here today. I'd like to make a couple of points before we start talking about the techniques themselves. The first one is that something I've mentioned already, is not about where you're doing it. So the choice points is something we don't really talk about right now, because it really is about the technique itself. And we're not going to talk about where we're doing it. It's about just getting a really good technique ready so we can manipulate the chi from wherever we want to do. That's the first point. Second thing I'm going to say is we are always working with 2 hands. So we have the needling hand and we have the supporting hand. Both hands are equally important. Both hands need to be working together. If I'm just using a needling hand to do this, very little is going to happen compared to me actually holding the body, making something else happen with a supporting hand that holds things in place so that I can use my needling hand. So we're always using 2 hands. That's very, very important. The third point I'd like to make is that the needling technique here only really starts once the needle is inserted. So I let you insert the needle any way you like, whether you're free needling, whether you're using a guide tube, whatever you want to do. We want the needle to go in and to reach a certain depth. And that's when we start. When I teach classes, when I teach needle technique classes, one thing I notice is that people often come in and they put the needle in, and at the moment where I think, right, we're ready to start, they think they're done. A lot of people tend to put the needle in and then you tap it in and then you leave it. Whereas from my point of view, the way I look at it now, that's when the work actually starts. So put the needle in any way you like, but once it's in, that's where we're talking about now. That's what we're doing now. So our first patient needs lifting, or the one that needs lowering. We're going to do channel travel technique. And that's a technique where we're trying to bring the chi up and down along a pathway in the body. I often do this at a point that's as far away as I can on the foot. That's a little bit fleshy. It happens to be the location of liver 3, but I'm not choosing it because of liver 3. I'm choosing it because it's a really, really good location to do this needling technique. So I insert my needle. I'm holding the foot. It's really important to hold the foot. I like to hold it so the fingertips of the other hand are on kidney 1 underneath. So that's a really nice grounding thing to do as well, to put a little bit of pressure on kidney 1 as you're holding it. My other hand is at the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently push upwards if I want to lift. So it's a nice slow movement. I'm pushing. If I exaggerate it, it's a curve. It's this kind of movement. So I'm pushing inwards ever so slightly, and I'm also pushing upwards a little bit. So I'm actually physically pressing the flesh, the fascia, all the soft tissue, everything's being pushed upwards a little bit with a needle. I'm going up. And now the key is, as I'm doing this, I'm also doing my lifting Daoyin. So whatever you felt earlier when we were doing the lifting movement, if you had any feelings in your body, that feeling of lightness, that feeling of lifting up, I'm doing my needle technique. So I'm pressing the needle in, holding tight with the other hand. And at the same time, I am lifting. I'm having that chi feeling going on inside me. And if I do it well, if I get it right, the same thing will happen in the patient. And they will tell us. They might not tell us verbally, but if I lift up, they may have a point where they go, oh, I just get a headache. And that's because you're pushing things up. Or the eyes will open and brighten. And you think, that's because I just pushed things up there. There will be a feedback. You will feel it happening. They will feel it happening. So that's our needle technique.
Connie, could I just interrupt you here? I
Sure.
know that's ever so rude of me. We're just wondering if you'd like to stop your screen share so that we can see you nice and big.
Oh, okay. Up. Stop share. There we go.
Brilliant. Now you're nice and big.
Can't see them now. Okay,
Everything you're doing.
sure.
Brilliant.
Okay. So I'll do it again. So this is my needle. This is my supporting hand. I'm in liver 3, which happens to be a good location. I've got my other hand. Oh, so I'm just trying to get the best angle so you can see everything. Okay, I've got my other hand underneath with the fingertips on kidney 1. The movement is this one, so it's a slight curve. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing in ever so slightly, and I'm pushing up ever so slightly at the same time. So I'm really pushing the soft tissue in the body upwards. And as I'm doing that, I'm also doing my own Dargin, lifting into it. So if I exaggerate, it's this, and then I'm going up as well. And as I said, if I get it right, the patient will give me feedback. Well, I'll see in the patient that something is happening there for them too. Yeah. Now, the other side of channel travel is that then we're pulling down again. So once we're up, we always have to go up first if we want to go down. So we put the needle in, we always go up, and then we do the opposite to pull the chi down, to lower the chi, where I'm pulling. And again, it's that curve. I'm pulling the needle out ever so slightly, and I'm pushing down. I'm pulling on the soft tissue. With the supporting hand as well, a little bit slight pull, and with the needle, a slight pull. And at the same time, I'm lowering my chi. I'm sinking down. And again, if I get it right, the patient will, either they will verbally say, oh, that's relaxing, that's good, or I will really see it happening in them. So that's, you know, the headache disappears, they're like, oh, it's gone now, that's good. Or that's the moment where the eyes close and they really relax into it. Or my favorite one is when they take the deep breath, when all that chi was up there, and as I'm pulling down, all of a sudden, that's the moment where they take a really nice deep breath and they've relaxed into the treatment. That's the moment I know, okay, I have now lowered the chi. And it's not liver 3 that did it, it's I made that happen by manipulating the chi, by making this happen for them. Even when we're lifting up, the truth is, even if I'm doing a lifting movement, I will often finish with a little bit of a lower at the end anyway, because as I said, it's not just one or the other, it's about the balance. And we don't necessarily want to leave people with chi stuck in their head. Even if they need it a bit, it's always good to bring things back down and to lower things down again. So that's our channel travel technique. The next one I was going to talk about is exiting technique. Well, that's the person who's got too much and we want to exit them. And the truth is, for this one, we're going to do cooling sky. A really good point to do cooling sky is at the top here, if they have a bit of flesh, because that's the area we want to access around the chest if they've got too much there. And what we can do there is really pull the flesh together with one hand. So there's some space to work with. For cooling sky, we need to put the needle in quite deep initially. So we want a bit of flesh so we can really easily go in quite deep. And once we're in there, we're going to do the technique, which is to gently lift. So I'm very gently lifting the needle up. I'm not sliding it out. The idea is not to slide it in and out. The idea is to lift it, and we want it to really grab the flesh. So the whole body is being pulled up a little bit. And at the same time, I'm lifting the grip I've got with the hand as well. So I don't keep pinning the flesh down. I gently release and lift as well. So the whole flesh, everything is being lifted up. And as I'm doing that, I'm doing my opening movement. So I get that feeling inside me that I'm opening. So if I exaggerate, I'm starting here, all nice and in. I'm going to lift here, and I'm opening. I'm going like this. So that's just to show you what's happening in treatment. It's internal, it's barely visible, but to exaggerate, that really is the movement. And again, if I get it right, the patient will feel it. If they're feeling really hot, for example, they may cool down either instantly or the next few minutes. All of a sudden, they will say, wow, I feel so much cooler. That feels good. Or the best one I had was somebody who was so agitated and couldn't relax. And the moment I did this, she fell asleep. And she told me afterwards that she felt me working there. And I did the technique, and from one sec to the next, it was like she fell into a black hole. So she was all agitated, and all of a sudden, cooling sky, exiting, letting the chi come out, that was the black hole and she could sleep. So we're not looking for that because that's happened once. So we're not looking for that necessarily, but what we're looking for is that feeling of either they're cooling or they're relaxing, or something is shifting, something is changing. And that's when I know, okay, I've done a good technique. I've manipulated that chi to achieve some exiting, to let the chi come out. The last one I wanted to talk about was a person who needs gathering. So chi is too agitated. And we want to, for them, we want to really gather them in. And in this situation, we're actually going to use some closing, the closing movement that we did. One more thing to tell you about needle technique and body work is that we use needles, but we could equally just use our hands, because it's not about the needle. The needle is just a tool for us to create a change in the body, to manipulate the chi. If I'm trying to go deep in the body, a needle is great because it really allows me to go right in there. If I'm trying to gather and go from the outside, actually, it may be better to not use a needle and just to do body work, but I'm using the same technique. It's the same skill, the same technique. So for this patient here, who's very ungathered in the chest, what I would do as a good closing technique, gathering technique, to really allow the chest to fill up, is to use my hands and to place them on. So they're lying on the couch, I'm standing at the head, I'm placing both hands on the bladder 13, bladder 15 area. And it's a nice touch that I'm going for. It's what we were practicing here. That nice soft touch where I'm very relaxed, but I'm really feeling I've got the whole surface of my hand in contact with the body, a nice relaxed touch. And then from there, I'm going to close. So I'm going to gently press into their body, but no tension, because if you press with tension, it's really uncomfortable for them. They get really anxious. It's counterproductive. What we want to do is have the hands on them and gently soften into it, relax into it, pressing from the elbows, pressing from the shoulder blades, just letting your weight go into that movement. And you can do that and press more and more and more. Do it for 20, 30 seconds, so it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then we gently release, gently let it come back out. So you're not seeing my hands. I'm not doing my hands. I've just got them here. So we're just pressing, pressing, pressing from our body weight, from everything else, 20 or 30 seconds into it. And then 20 or 30 seconds of very slow lifting up again. And then we repeat 20, 30 seconds of slowly letting the weight come into it. And back out. And at the same time, internally, I'm doing my Da Yin. I'm going for that closing feeling, that I'm really closing everything in, letting everything grow inside, being nice and calm and inward looking. And if we get it right again, they love it. When we come back up, all of a sudden, they're taking the deepest breaths that they're taking for a really long time. And it really settles their spirits and brings their spirit in. As I said, it's a little bit difficult explaining these without actually being able to show them on a patient, but I'm hoping that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. And certainly I'm hoping gives you an idea of what I was talking about at the beginning, that idea of the link between the Da Yin, the Qigong you do, and the needling skill. That link that when I used to practice, I just didn't find it. If the needling technique was all about just twiddling and using your intention, I didn't know what that meant. And now all of a sudden, using these Da Yin practices and using this kind of needling, it makes so much sense. And I put so much of my Da Yin into this. And as the years go by, as I practice more Da Yin, my needling techniques are getting stronger and stronger. And what I found in treatment is that I use a lot fewer needles than I used to do. Sometimes I may only use 2 or 3 needles, but every needle is a really clear shift in the patient. I really achieve something with the patient that changes. So we don't need lots of needles. We just need to strategize making those really clear shifts. I'm just going to give you a last screen. Oops. There we are. Okay, in terms of what you can take away from today. Now, if you're interested in developing this kind of needling and working with this system, the things you can do is, number 1, look out for the 8 functions of Qi in your patient. So whenever you have a patient coming in, do your usual diagnosis, do your usual treatment, but then also have that space in your brain where you start asking yourself, what is happening to this patient in terms of the functions of Qi? Do they need more lifting or more lowering? Do they need more gathering or more dispersing? Let's see what's really happening with them. So just for you to get used to thinking in that way and to start to recognize those patterns. So that's something, if you want, you can do straight away. Practicing the 8 storing chi and developing sensitivity exercises, of course, would be fantastic. If you are interested, I would recommend you log on to the Association for Traditional Studies Teachable site, and they have an online course you can get there, which is called 100 Days of Pulling Chi. We call it Pulling Chi, those 8 exercises. And this online course is Andrew Nugent-Head demonstrating those exercises 100 times. And every time you get slightly different instructions. Every time you're adding a layer of instruction, you're adding something new to look out for, something new to work with. And that's a really interesting way of working with them, because as we mentioned, the idea is that you're developing sensitivity. You're doing the same thing, but every time you're noticing something new, you're working with something new. And it's great to have instructions to be able to do the instructions that take you through it. So for those of you who are interested, that's something I would recommend. And the third thing I would recommend is, in terms of actual needling technique, practice sinking into your needling techniques. Use both hands. So what I was mentioning earlier, that I've met a lot of practitioners who put the needle in, and then once it's in, they don't dare to touch it, they step away from it. Don't be scared of holding the needle. Don't be scared of having that contact with the patient. And a nice way of doing this is, even if you're not doing any needle technique beyond that, just holding the needle, holding the patient's leg. Imagine I'm at spleen 6, for example, or I'm at stomach 36. I'm holding the leg, I've got my needle in. I'm just holding it, and I'm going to relax, and I'm going to let my body weight sink into the tip of the needle. And I'll just stay there for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, however long I want to stay there. And just get used to that feeling so you're not scared of it. So you're like, okay, yes, I'm holding the needle. Patient's relaxed, patient's fine with this. I'm sinking into it. So I'm changing the depth of the needle a little bit without them noticing it, without them, having any reaction. And just start to get used to that. I think that is something that if you start working with this, it will change the way you think about needling and change the way you think about needle techniques. Okay, that's what I wanted to mention for today. So I'm very happy to take questions now if we have some. Let me come out of this. Actually, I am going to just leave this on here. Any questions? I've got my email on there as well. So if anybody has any questions after today, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer questions. And I'm putting on the screen as well the next webinars in the BIACSI's series, Let's Talk About Anxiety. Alan, if you want to go through them, feel free to do that, or I'll just leave them here for people to look at.
Yeah, it looks like people will be able to see those, and details will be given out in each of the e-newses before each one. But there's essentially one webinar for every Sunday morning in August. So we have a few questions that are built up in the chat box. At this point, if people would like to use the raise your hand function, and you'll find that in the participants box. If you click participants at the bottom, a box will appear which will either be at the top on the right or the entirety of the right. If you raise your hand then you'll be able to ask your burning questions. I'll unmute each person as we go. I think for now I'll just ask the two which are built up in the chat box. There's one question about the difference between opening and exiting technique.
Okay. They are linked. And the interesting thing about working with those Chinese fundamental concepts is that at the beginning you think, oh, everything is a beautiful grid and neatly organized and everything is completely separate. And then as you get used to Chinese thinking, you realize that actually, no, there is actually a lot of crossover, and depending on different situations, you will do things differently. So there are times when those two techniques are very, very similar and you can use them interchangeably. And then there are other times when they are very separate. Exiting is very much about going from one place of the body into another place. So for example, if there's tension here and I've got too much in the head, I want to exit the head and enter the torso. So I want to go from one area to another. Whereas if we're talking about, it was opening, wasn't it? The other one that was being asked?
Yeah, opening.
But opening is more about being open to the outside and letting things come out to the outside. That's, you know, a quick way of explaining it. But as I said, there are times when they will be used interchangeably as well.
Mm.
Does that answer the question?
I hope so. Feel free to chime in if that hasn't. There's another question that's just appeared, which is a great question. How do you find, Conny, the direct interchange between the chi of yourself and your patient as you're doing this work? Do you find that you need to sort of establish some sort of boundary? Is Vina, who asked the question, says she finds this with Tweenar to a degree and wonders if it will be the same with acupuncture or not so much.
The way I see it and the way it works for me is my chi and the patient's chi are separate. So I'm not giving them chi and I'm not receiving chi from them. I've got my chi and they've got theirs. If I change my chi in a certain way, their chi tends to mirror mine and vice versa. So I think, you know, a nice way of explaining it is if you walk into a room and you have a few people in the room who are feeling quite low and quite depressed, there's something in that room that you walk in and you yourself, you just feel, oh gosh, I'm feeling really low now as well. You do pick up on things, but I don't think it's because we're absorbing the chi. I think it's just because we're mirroring it. And likewise, if I walk into a room and people are really happy and jumping around and bubbly, I'll get that feeling as well, and I want to jump around and be bubbly. But again, I'm not absorbing anything from them. It's just that mirroring that's happening. And that's how I see it, and that's how I'm aware of it. So a worry that people often say is they're worried about picking up negative energy or being affected in that way. And I don't think that that's happening for me as such. That's not how I see it. I just think of it as, you know, we're separate, and I keep that in mind. And I'm very clear in my head. Now I'm affecting that chi on purpose, and now I'm me again. And for me, as long as I have that really clear connection in my head, I'm okay. I don't feel affected in that way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I attended your course before, I found something quite similar to that as well. Even though you're using your whole body, it did feel like your technique was there in your hands rather than interflow, that you were manipulating. Yeah. So if people have any more burning questions, do use that that raise your hand function. There was one earlier which, if Sarah's still there, if she'd like to elaborate slightly, she just asked about the hot or cold functions of chi, I think. I wonder if that's maybe synonymous with gathering and dispersing, or...
It's not one of the functions as such, because all of the functions could be too hot or could be too cold. It tends to be that if there's too much gathering, it tends to be hot, but it could also be cold. There's no clear link. So for me, I think about hot and cold, but it's not linked to any particular function. In terms of needle technique, if I think somebody's got too much heat, for example, then I will do cooling sky, for example, and that is exiting, that is opening and exiting and letting things come out. Whereas if somebody's got a very cold digestion, for example, and I want to warm it up, I can do burning mountain needle technique, which is very much a storing, gathering needle technique, and that really warms the body up as well. So hot and cold does come into it, but it's not a clear-cut thing that this technique is always warm or that one is always cold. It doesn't really work like that.
Mm-hmm. And is the burning mountain synonymous with the gathering technique? Or
we have gathering that's not burning mountain as well.
That's not burning mountain. Okay. We have a question. Do you have a gathering technique with a needle?
Yes, you can. You can. Any of the techniques you can do with your hands or you can do with the needles. So everything is possible. It's just some situations is more appropriate to do one or to do the other, or certain body areas is more appropriate to do one or to do the other. The gathering technique, for example, if we're working with somebody with anxiety and we're trying to gather the Shen, I do want to have a little bit of flesh to work with. So if I'm working on the bladder 13, bladder 15 area, between the ribs, there's very little space for me to move. So I can do spreading techniques, I can do other things in there. But in terms of gathering, I'm much more comfortable using my hands, and also using my hands will feel much more soothing to the person in that area as well. So anything is possible. It's just about choosing, strategizing and choosing what we think will be the best thing to do for this patient at any given time.
Grand. Fab. So for any of the questions I've asked, if anybody who's asked them is still thinking not quite clear, then do ask again in the chat box now if you need to. Otherwise, it looks like you've done such a wonderful job at explaining everything, Conny, that it
either really good sign, or it's a terrible sign that everybody's gone to sleep. So, we'll see.
I'm sure it's a sign that you've explained things so well, because really with this, it really is the doing, isn't it? It's not so much a quizzical, cerebral thing. It's just doing it, and it has its effect.
That's right. Yeah. Which is why at the end I tried to give these 3 points for people to take away today, because I appreciate I'm talking about something very practical, but obviously it's a webinar and there is no practical aspect to it. But I'm hoping that, with the pointers I've given you in terms of how to think about the 8 functions of Qi and just practicing holding the needle and sinking into it, people will be able to start developing some of these skills if they want to. Yeah.
Grand. Well, I actually have a question myself.
Yes.
I feel like that's slightly bolshy, actually, interjecting my own questions. Because when I'd come away from your course before, it really had struck me, how with the techniques that we're doing, the technique is you at the patient, you with the patient, doing your direct contact.
Yes.
And I was aware that Andrew, whom you'd trained with in the US, runs, I think he calls it a community clinic, and I just wondered in my head, either in your practice or how you observed his practice when you were studying with him, if there were times where you did sort of contactless retention of the needle in the patient and walked away at any point, or if really your whole work is there on the patient.
Yes and no. As a general rule, the vast majority of treatments that Andrew and Julianne do over there is in contact with the patient all the time. Now, that may mean that, they're either physically manipulating the needle, or there are times when we will put a needle in and then we leave it to do work. But then if we're with the patient, we might as well do something. And then we work with our hands, we do some deep Qi, we do some gathering, we do something else on the patient as well. And then there are some very rare occasions. I'm not going to say that we never just put the knees in and leave them. There are occasions when we do that, but it's a choice. It's a really clear choice that, okay, for this patient, this will now be appropriate. I want to give them that space. I want to let them relax. So I make a choice for that patient. And that's very different from having that as a default, where my default is I put the needle in and I leave it there. So it does happen. I'm not going to say it's never done, but it's very much a choice, and it's a rare choice. Most of the times, Andrew, Julianne, and myself now as well, that's the way I work very much myself. We put the needles in, we manipulate them, we stay with the patient, we do some work on them constantly throughout the treatment.
Grand. Thank you for that explanation. And I mean, thank you very much for this wonderfully concise. We have some lovely comments that have accumulated in the chat box. Thank you so much, Conny. You're a wonderful teacher. Great webinar. Very useful, informative, concise, thorough, very helpful. Lots of praises being sung your way.
Well, thank you very much.
So on behalf of Biaxia, I would like to thank you for all the time you've given, not just to doing the webinar today, but for all the time you've given to preparing it and for making this available for our practitioners.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much to all of you.
Grand. Wonderful. So this is really people's last chance. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Otherwise, I think it's a good place to let people run away, grab some lunch, and get on with their lovely Sundays. Thank you everybody for joining as well. Bear in mind, you can access this later on the website, and we do have more talks coming up on the consecutive Sundays as well, from Danny Blythe, from Michelle Venters, and from Sarah Pritchard, who's next week. So lovely. So thank you once again, Connie. Thank you everybody for joining, and I will finish off here. Grand. Ta-ra. Have a lovely Sunday, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.